The clinking of plates filled the air as Wine helped the maid set the dining table. She moved around with a distant look in her eyes. She was lost in her thoughts, barely noticing his presence. He paused for a moment, taking in the sight of Wine. Her usual radiant smile was replaced with furrowed brows. "Good morning," he greeted, his voice gentle yet filled with warmth. She blinked, pulled back from her reverie, and turned to face him with a smile. "Good morning, 𝐶𝐿." He crossed the room in a few strides, pulling her into his arms. "You seem far away this morning." He kissed the top of her head. "What's in your mind?" Wine hesitated, not wanting to burden him with her worries. She looked at him with wavering smile. "It's nothing, just thinking about some things." 𝐶𝐿 narrowed his eyes slightly, sensing she wasn't telling the whole truth. He tilted her chin gently with his finger, his gaze locking onto hers. "Wine, you can tell me anything. What's troubling you?" She shook her head lightly, pulling away to finish setting the table. "Really, it's nothing important, just silly thoughts." 𝐶𝐿 watched her for a moment, his expression a mix of concern and affection. He stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You can tell me when you're ready." Wine leaned into his embrace, closing her eyes briefly, savoring the comfort of his presence. "I will." He placed soft kisses on her shoulder. "I'll always chase away your worries. I can't stand seeing you like this." She turned around facing him. "Thank you for everything, 𝐶𝐿," she said with a smile. "Now let's eat, everything is getting cold." He nodded, pulling out a chair and sat while pulling her onto his lap. "What are you doing? The maids are here," she mumbled. 𝐶𝐿 shrugged his shoulders. "I like eating like this. The maids will leave anyway." He brought the morsel to her lips. Wine shook her head and ate it. The rest of the time, 𝐶𝐿 ate along with feeding her. They both made their way out of the living room. "How's your university going?" "Good." "Tell me if someone troubles you. I will teach them a good lesson." She nodded with a forced smile. She knew if she said about her bullies, he will torture them to death. At university. The day at university had gone smoothly for Wine. 𝐶𝐿's words and the peaceful morning they shared had given her strength. However, as the last class of the day ended, she found herself alone in a quiet hallway. As she turned a corner, Wine saw the 4 girls who had been making her life miserable. Sophia smiled as she approached Wine with her group. "Hey, Wine." Her voice dripped sarcasm. "Missed us." Wine's heart sank. She tried to walk past them, but the girls blocked her path. "Please leave me alone." She tried to keep her voice steady. "Oh, but we're not done having fun." Another girl sneered, pushing her towards the storeroom door. Before Wine could react, they shoved her inside, slamming the door shut behind her. Panic surged through her as she banged on the door. "Let me out, this isn't funny." The girl's laugh echoed from the other side. "See you later, loser." She taunted before their footsteps faded away. Wine's breath grew rapid as she realized the door was locked from the outside. She tried to calm herself, looking around the dimly lit room. She took out her phone, but found no signal. Desperation began to creep in, but she forced herself to think. She dialed Patrick's number several times, but there was no signal. "Help, is anyone there?" she cried, banging the door with shaky hands. Suddenly she heard a rustling noise. Wine's eyes darted toward a corner where a tiny grey mouse emerged, its whiskers twitching. Her stomach churned, and she backed away, pressing herself against the wall. The mouse scurried closer, its beady eyes shining in the semi-darkness. 4 to 5 more mouses followed. Panic surged through her. She fumbled for her phone, her hands trembling. With a desperate breath, she dialed Patrick's number once more. The screen flashed no signal. No, she muttered, her eyes never leaving the mice. Her breath went uneven. It paused, then continued its approach. Wine held the phone higher, moving to the other side of the room. She tried to call again. Still no signal. She felt her soul leaving her body in slow motion. "Patrick, please pick up," she whispered to herself. Her heart pounded in her chest and she felt trapped, not just by the locked door but her fear. The mouse crept closer and Wine climbed onto the stack of boxes, clutching her phone like a lifeline. With shaky hands, she opened the messaging app and typed a quick message to Patrick, hoping it would go through once she had a signal. She hit send, praying for a miracle. Tears of frustration and fear welled up in her eyes as the mouse disappeared behind another stack of boxes. She curled up on her perch, her breath coming in raised gasps. She closed her eyes, focusing on the thought of him. Tears freely rolled down her eyes as she quietly sobbed. She didn't know how much time had passed or if she had passed out or was too lost in the memories of him until someone barged into the room, breaking the door. She opened her eyes slightly and saw Patrick's worried face. Wine? He rushed to her. Wine's face was drenched with tears. He helped her stand and walked out. Patrick quietly walked her to the car, fearing what would Thane do to him if he learned about Wine's condition. He gave her the water bottle. Wine gulped in and leaned on the seat, closing her eyes. She drew a deep breath. Did Sophie and her gang do it? She nodded, opening her eyes and letting out a sigh. Should I take you to the doctor? He asked worriedly. No, I'm fine, let's go home. Patrick nodded hesitantly. Let's tell him to deal with these clothes. Why are you keeping it from him? You know your king is already worried about his sir. And what he will do, you know better than me. Not to forget what he will do to you too. She said in a low tone. Her mind was still in a daze. She wanted to cry her heart out, but it was as if her tear had dried. Patrick let out a sigh. He will do something more terrible if he discovers it later. Wine remained silent, her heart still trembled, thinking about the storeroom. Anyways, let's get you something to eat, then I'll drop you home. She shook her head in denial. I don't want to eat anything, I feel nauseous. Just send me home. He nodded, telling the driver to drive off. At night, Wine spent the rest of the day muddled up in thoughts. Patrick stayed with her for a while to keep her mind off what happened. They arrived home and found her staring at the TV screen absent-mindedly. I'm back, he said, kissing her cheek from behind. Wine looked at him, her hollow eyes lit, instantly seeing his charming smile. How are you? Fine, she said in a low tone. Thane knew something was bothering her and he was adamant about finding it. Did you have dinner? She shook her head. Should I heat the food for you? She caressed his face while Thane leaned into her touch. For me or for us? I don't have an appetite. He stood straight. I also don't have an appetite. I'll just freshen up and sleep, he said, and made his way to the bedroom. Wine noticed the weariness in his eyes and tone. Before she could stop him, he disappeared from her sight. She sat blankly for a while and then went to heat the food for him. She came to the room with the tray and placed it on the bed. After a few moments, Thane came out of the washroom. Come, let's eat. He raised his brows. Didn't you say that you don't have an appetite? He poked her nose. But now I do. She shrugged her shoulders, holding him by the arm, and sat him. They both ate in silence, lost in their thoughts. They made a mental note to call Patrick. Wine picked up the tray and walked out, while Thane called Patrick after she was gone, but he didn't answer the call. He dialed Patrick's number several times, but the call went unanswered. He lay closing his eyes and waiting for Patrick to call back. Wine did the dishes and came to the room after a few good minutes. Then had his eyes closed. She thought he might be asleep. She sat closer to him and stared at his face blankly. Only if she didn't fear Sophia's life, she would have told him by now. Thane's phone buzzed, grabbing his attention. As he was about to open his eyes, he felt Wine's swift move taking the phone. He still pretended to be asleep and listened to what she would say to Patrick. Patrick, as soon as Patrick heard her voice, he went silent. Why did you call Thane that too at this hour? She said in a low tone, making sure she wasn't waking Thane. Him had called me several times. She glanced at Thane's face. He might want to ask you about me. I know he's suspicious, but please, Patrick, don't tell him anything about Sophia or today's incident. Thane held back and urged to snatch the phone from her hand. Wine tried to understand. Him will kill me as well. I won't let him do anything to you, I promise. Thane clenched his fist. He will surely deal with Patrick. They talked for a while and declined the call. Wine let out a sigh and laid over Thane, placing her head on his chest. The sight of the storeroom and those mice flashed before her eyes. She closed her eyes, trying hard to control her tears, but they still streamed down her face. I was so scared to reach him, she mumbled. I wish I could have told you this face to face, but I don't want you to act rashly. Sophia and her friends locked me in the storeroom. There were mouses. I screamed for help, but no one was there. I tried calling Patrick, but there was no signal. Then clenched his jaw and opened his eyes. He stared at her hair with a dark gaze. As if feeling his gaze, I lifted her head, but then swiftly closed his eyes. I'm sorry, please don't be mad at me or Patrick if you ever discovered about this. I'm just scared of your anger. She whispered and pecked his lips, burying her face in his neck. Then tightened his grip around her, waiting impatiently for tomorrow. Next morning, Wine didn't find Them when she woke up. After freshening up, she went out of the room and asked the maid if Them was gone. The maid said he walked out early in the morning when she arrived. Wine confusingly went out and the driver drove her to the university. As soon as Wine arrived, she stared around with a strange gaze as the university was quiet. She checked the time, making sure she wasn't late, and made her way inside. She walked further in the hallway. She could hear muffled screams and cries. Her heart sank as she turned around the corner and froze, seeing all the students surrounded by something. She walked past them as soon as the sight of the dean appeared before her, who was being beaten by 3 men. She gasped and gazed at the person seated on the chair with crossed legs. Them, she mumbled as he was staring deadly at her. Them, why are you beating him? Stop them. She moved closer to him. When her eyes landed on Patrick, whose face was bruised, she gasped. Patrick! Wine was about to move to him, but Them held her arm and put her on his lap, causing her to shudder. What are you doing? She said embarrassingly when the familiar cries caught her attention. Sophia, is she in the storeroom? She asked, surprised. Them nodded, tugging the hair strand behind her ear. Along with her friends, he said in a calm tone. Then stop it, please. He ignored her and turned his face to the students. This is what you get if you bully my wife. He passed the death glare, causing everyone to shuffle uncomfortably. Got it? His sudden growl made them flinch. They all nodded vigorously and said, yes sir, in unison. Good, now out, all of you. He dismissed them and gestured for his men to stop. Wine's heart ached at the sight of poor Dean, who could barely breathe. Did you get your lesson, old man? You know many students are victims of bullying in your university, yet you didn't take any action and brushed them off instead. I'm sorry, please forgive me. Then just shook his head, decorated his face a bit more, but not here. The guys took him away. Wanna have a look in there? He asked her, pointing at the storeroom. I reluctantly nodded, scared of his seriousness. Patrick. He gestured for him to open the storeroom door. As soon as the door opened, I let out a gasp, clutching Then's shoulders, as Sophie and her friends were all wandered, surrounded by dozens of mice. She closed her eyes, breathing heavily, seeing so many mice. Wine, please, help us out, she cried. Wine stared at her with a blank gaze. She didn't feel any pity for Sophie or her friends. You knew Wine has a musophobia, yet you locked her here, he said through gritted teeth. Them, take me away. She barely whispered, pressing her forehead against his cheek. Then stood scooping her along and gestured for Patrick to close the door. Let them be in there for 5 more hours. He walked away. They arrived home in utter silence. Now Wine was sitting on the bed, fidgeting her fingers while Them brought her the glass of water and handed her. She sipped the water, staring at Them, who was scrolling through his phone. Them, are you mad at me? She stood and walked to him. Then slid the phone into his pocket and looked at her with a serious gaze. It's all my mistake. You shouldn't have hit Patrick. Your uncle would be angry if he comes to know you hit his son. Patrick deserves it. Next time, don't try to hide something from me. This lesson should be enough. His tone was menacing. Wine reached out to his hand and held it. I forbade him from telling you. You did what I was scared of. He passed her a questioning gaze. The dean then shrugged his shoulders. He deserves it. You have been bullied for 6 months. He did nothing. Plenty of students are bullied every day, but he just watched them. 5 students have committed suicide in the last 3 months, but that bastard does nothing. She stared at him with wide eyes. 5 students suicide. Yeah, and that bastard didn't let the news out. Instead, he said they transferred. Everyone deserves what they got today. Wine glanced at his knuckles which were bruised. She looked at him. But how did you know what happened yesterday? He smiled. I heard you crying last night and talking to Patrick on phone. Her eyes were about to pop out of sockets. You were awake. He nodded. Then I also deserve something. I'm also at fault, he hummed in response. You do. She closed the distance between them and covered his face. No silent treatment, please, she mumbled. He stared at her. I'm sorry, I promise I won't keep anything from you. I'll make it up to you. He pecked his lips. Tears is the last thing I would ever want to see in your eyes, he whispered. Thank you so much for loving me to this extent. She pecked his lips several times. Love isn't enough to describe what I feel for you. He pulled her into a hug and closed his eyes, inhaling her scent.